Welcome to Dreamtale Sleep Stories. Tonight's reading is The Whisperer in the Walls. Settle into your bed or sofa and let your shoulders, jaw, and eyelids grow heavy. Inhale slowly, 1, 2, 3, and sigh the air away, allowing the day to fade into quiet dark. With every soft inhale, you invite fresh English phrases. With every gentle exhale, stray thoughts drift farther off. Behind my voice flows a gentle 528 Hz melody, renowned for guiding the mind toward deep relaxation. Keep your eyes closed or follow the captions, whichever feels right. Simply receive the rhythm and resonance of the language. Deep in rest, tonight's phrases will take root like seeds, ready to bloom into stronger English skills with the morning light. When you feel settled, hold that unhurried breath and allow yourself to drift into the tale. The Whisperer in the Walls begins now. And when the story's final line has faded, the music will linger a little longer, carrying you gently deeper into sleep. The Whisperer in the Walls. I have been here for so long that I no longer remember the taste of food or the warmth of sunlight on skin. Time moves differently when you exist between the wooden beams and plaster. When your world is darkness, punctuated only by the muffled sounds of life beyond these barriers. I am the Whisperer in the Walls, though that is not the name I was born with. That name, like so many other things, has been lost to the centuries. The Blackwood family moved in on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays have always brought change to this house. It was a Tuesday when I was first trapped here, but Tuesday when the Great Fire nearly freed me, and now another Tuesday, bringing fresh souls into my domain. Through the tiny gaps where old wood has warped with age, I watch them arrive. A father with tired eyes, a mother whose smile never quite reached those eyes, and 2 children, a boy of perhaps 12 and a girl no more than 8. They walked through my hallways with the wide-eyed wonder of the living, admiring the crown molding I had watched craftsmen install 200 years ago, running their fingers along the banister I had once gripped in my final moments of mortality. The real estate agent, a nervous woman who had felt my presence during her previous visits, hurried them through the tour. She knew something was wrong with this house, but commission speaks louder than instinct in her profession. It's perfect, the mother breathed, standing in what had once been the morning room. Don't you think so, David? The father nodded, though I could see the hesitation in his movements. He was sensitive, this one. Some humans are more attuned to the presence of the departed than others. His daughter had it too. She kept glancing at the walls as if she could see through them, as if she could see me. I decided to wait before making myself known. The rushing always spoiled the delicate work of fear. Terror, true terror, must be cultivated like a garden. Plant the seeds of unease, water them with doubt, and watch as they bloom into beautiful, consuming dread. The first week, I did nothing but observe. I learned their routines, their habits, their fears. The father, David, worked late at his computer in what had been the study where old Judge Morrison had shot himself in 1923. The mother, Sarah, suffered from insomnia and would often wander the halls at night, perfect for my purposes. The boy, Michael, was absorbed in his video games and barely noticed the world around him. But the girl, Emma, she was already afraid of the dark, already checking under her bed and in her closet each night. It was during their second week that I began my work. Small things at first, a door creaking when no wind blew, a shadow moving just at the edge of vision, the faint sound of breathing in an empty room. I had perfected these techniques over decades of practice. The Hendersons in 1987 had lasted only 3 months. The Wakefield family, before them, had endured nearly a year before breaking. Each family taught me something new about the architecture of fear. Sarah was the first to mention it to her husband. I listened through the walls as she whispered in their bed, "Do you ever feel like we're being watched?" "It's an old house," David replied, though his voice carried its own uncertainty. Old houses make noise, but I could tell he felt it too. They all did, eventually. I began to focus on Emma. Children were always the most receptive, their minds not yet closed to the impossible. Late at night, when shadows grew long and the house settled into its ancient bones, I would whisper through the walls of her room. Not words, those would come later, but sounds that might be words, sounds that made her pull her covers up to her chin and squeeze her eyes shut. One night, as I traced my ethereal fingers along the inside of the walls, I found myself remembering my own daughter, Elizabeth. She had been 8 years old when it happened. The memory came unbidden, sharp as glass, even after all these years. Her laugh, the way she would run to greet me when I came home from the mill, how she would beg for one more story before bed. I pulled back from Emma's room, disturbed by the parallel. But sentiment was a luxury I could no longer afford. I had work to do. The whispers grew bolder. I began to speak actual words, letting them seep through the old plaster like water through stone. "Come closer," I would breathe when Sarah passed by the basement door. "Look inside," I would suggest when David paused before the attic stairs. "I'm here," I would promise when Emma lay trembling in her bed. Michael remained oblivious, his headphones a barrier I could not penetrate. But the others were beginning to crack. Sarah started taking sleeping pills. David installed new locks on doors that didn't need them. Emma began sleeping in her parents' bed. It was during the 4th week that I made my first real appearance. Sarah was alone in the kitchen, washing dishes from dinner. The rest of the family was in the living room, the sound of their television masking my movements. I gathered my energy, pulling the cold from every corner of the house, and manifested as a shadow in the window's reflection. She saw me immediately. The plate in her hands shattered on the floor, and her scream brought the others running. But by then, I had retreated back into my walls, leaving only the broken ceramic and her terror as evidence. "What happened?" David asked, pulling her into his arms. I saw, but she couldn't finish. How do you explain the impossible? How do you tell your family that something inhuman shares their home? I felt a strange sensation then. Not quite regret, but something adjacent to it. In life, I had been a protector, a provider. Now, I was the thing that families feared, the monster in the walls. The transformation was complete, yet somehow still ongoing. The house itself seemed to pulse with my emotions. I had been part of it for so long that the boundaries between building and spirit had blurred. When I was angry, the pipes would groan and bang. When I was melancholy, cold drafts would sweep through rooms, regardless of closed windows. The house was my body now, and through it, I could touch the world of the living. I decided to accelerate my timeline. The previous family, the Chens, had interested me more. They had tried to communicate, had brought in mediums and paranormal investigators. The Blackwoods just wanted to leave, and I couldn't allow that. Not yet. That night, I appeared to David. He was working late in the study, the glow of his laptop the only light in the room. I materialized slowly behind him, letting my reflection appear gradually in the computer screen. Unlike his wife, he didn't scream. He turned slowly, his face pale but composed, and looked directly at where I stood. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It was a fair question, one I had been asked before by braver souls. What did I want? Freedom? Revenge? Company? The truth was more complex than any single answer could convey. Instead of responding, I showed him. I let him see glimpses of my past. The mill accident that had taken my arm. The infection that had followed. The fever that had burned through me as I lay dying in the very room where he now sat. I showed him my wife's tears, my daughter's confusion, the doctor shaking his head. I showed him the moment of my death and the horrifying realization that followed. That I was not moving on, that I was trapped. David gasped and gripped his desk, overwhelmed by the visions. When I finally released him, he was trembling. You were human," he said, and I could hear the pity in his voice. Pity. I had not expected pity. Fear, yes. Anger, certainly. But pity? It burned worse than any exorcism attempt. I fled back to my walls, confused and unsettled. In my haste, I knocked over a lamp, shattered a picture frame, and set every smoke alarm in the house screaming. The family huddled together in the hallway, and I could hear Emma crying, asking when they could go home. "This is home," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. The next morning, I watched them at breakfast. They were different now, united in their fear, but also in their determination. David had told them about me, or at least some version of what he had seen. Michael had finally removed his headphones and was paying attention. Emma clung to her mother's hand. "Maybe we can help him," David suggested quietly. "Maybe that's what he wants. Help moving on." "I don't care what it wants," Sarah replied sharply. "I want my children safe." They began to research the history of the house, visiting the library and the historical society. I followed them through the town's old walls. For my reach extended beyond just this house, though weaker the further I traveled. They learned about the mill owner, Thomas Ashford, who had died in 1823, about his family, about the tragedy that had befallen them after his death. My wife, Margaret, had tried to maintain the mill, but without my knowledge of the business, it had failed within a year. She had been forced to sell the house, this house, and move with Elizabeth to her sister's home 3 states away. I never learned what became of them after that. My world had shrunk to these walls, these rooms, this eternal prison of wood and stone. The Blackwoods research had given them power, the power of knowledge, of understanding. They knew my name now, Thomas Ashford. It had been so long since anyone had spoken it aloud. Emma was the one who tried to talk to me first. Her parents were out, meeting with what I suspected was a real estate agent about breaking their lease. Michael was at a friend's house. She sat in her room with a piece of paper and crayons, drawing. "Mr. Ashford," she said softly, "are you lonely?" I manifested partially, just enough for her to see my outline in the afternoon sunlight streaming through her window. She didn't run. Children are so much braver than we give them credit for. "I get lonely too sometimes," she continued, still coloring. "Even with my family here. Is that why you scare people? Because you're lonely?" I found myself moving closer, drawn by her innocence. She was drawing a house, this house, but in her picture, it was bright and cheerful, with flowers in the garden and a sun smiling overhead. "I'm drawing this for you," she said. "Maybe if you had something pretty to look at, you wouldn't be so sad." Sad? Was that what I was? I had thought myself angry, vengeful, purposeful in my haunting. But perhaps the child saw clearer than I did. I whispered through the walls, softer than ever before, "Thank you." She smiled and kept drawing, adding a figure in one of the windows, a man waving. When her parents returned, they found her asleep on the floor, her drawing complete. They also found me, fully manifested, standing guard over her sleep, as I once had stood guard over Elizabeth's dreams. "Please," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Please don't hurt her." "I never wanted to hurt anyone," I replied, my voice like wind through old boards. I just wanted to be remembered, to be seen, to know that I had existed, that my life had meant something. David stepped forward cautiously. "We see you, Thomas. We know your story. Your wife and daughter, they survived. Margaret remarried, a good man who raised Elizabeth as his own. She became a teacher, had children of her own. Your line continued. You are remembered." How could he know this? But looking at his face, I saw truth there. They had researched more than just my death. Is that real?" I asked, my form flickering with emotion. "Elizabeth Ashford Connolly," David said, "born 1815, died 1897, buried in Pleasant Grove Cemetery with her children and grandchildren around her. She lived a full life, Thomas. You gave her that chance with your hard work before the accident." I felt something shifting within me, a loosening of bonds I hadn't realized were there. The walls seemed less solid suddenly, less constraining. "But what happens to you if I go?" I asked, looking at Emma's drawing. "Who will remember me then?" "We will," Emma said, waking up. She held up her picture. "I'll put this in my memory book, and I'll tell my kids about the sad man who lived in the walls, and how we helped him find his family again." The simplicity of it broke something in me. For 2 centuries, I had held on through fear, through anger, through the sheer force of will that refused to be forgotten. But perhaps there was another way to be remembered. Through kindness, through story, through the compassion of a little girl who saw past the monster to the man beneath. I think I'm tired," I admitted, my form beginning to fade at the edges. "So very tired." "Then rest," Sarah said softly, her fear replaced by something gentler. "Rest and find your family." I looked at them one last time, this living family that had somehow broken through centuries of bitterness and isolation. "Take care of this house," I whispered. "It has good bones." And then, for the first time since 1823, I let go. The walls released me like an exhaled breath. I felt myself expanding, dissipating, moving beyond the confines that had defined me for so long. But it wasn't frightening, it was liberating. I caught a glimpse of light, warm and welcoming, and within it, familiar forms waiting. The last thing I heard was Emma's voice. "Goodbye, Mr. Ashford. Say hello to Elizabeth for us." The Blackwoods stayed in the house without my presence. It became what it should have been all along, just an old house with creaky floors and settling walls, full of history, but no longer haunted by it. Emma kept her drawing, and true to her word, she told the story of Thomas Ashford to anyone who would listen. Not as a ghost story meant to frighten, but as a tale of redemption and the power of understanding. Sometimes, on very quiet nights, they claimed they could hear something in the walls. But it wasn't whispers of fear or anger. It was the sound of laughter, distant and joyful, as if somewhere beyond the veil, a father had finally found his daughter again. And in this way, I was remembered not as the whisperer in the walls, but as Thomas Ashford, husband, father, and man who had simply lost his way home. The Blackwoods had given me more than release. They had given me back my humanity. And for that, I would be eternally grateful, wherever eternity took me. The house stands still today, occupied by the Blackwoods, who have made it their own. Emma's children play in the same rooms where I once dwelt in darkness, their laughter bright and unafraid. And sometimes, when they ask about the man in their mother's old drawing, she tells them my story, ensuring that Thomas Ashford is remembered not for the fear he caused, but for the love he carried, even beyond death. In the end, that's all any of us really want: to be remembered truly, to be understood, and to find our way back to those we love. It just took me 200 years and a little girl's kindness to remember that myself.